All right, well, hello and welcome to Transform Tuesday. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Products and Services here at Alpha Software. And today I'm going to be going over a couple of Transform Tuesday things that you're going to want to see, some new stuff. Also, I'm here to answer your questions. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. So I'm going to begin here by sharing my screen, and you should see, oh, let me click on that. And if someone out there could confirm that, in fact, they can hear my voice and that my screen is coming through. Oh, excellent. Thanks so much. I appreciate that. All right, so let's get started. I didn't actually get a lot prepared for this week because I was busy testing out the new version of the Transform application, the new Transform filler. So I'm going to first talk about that. Coming out, I believe it's going to be tomorrow. It might be later on today, but we will send you an email. There is going to be a new release of Alpha Transform. Now, there aren't a ton of new features. These are mostly stability fixes and stuff like that, but we just wanted to let you know ahead of time what's coming down the road. The first thing is pinch zoom. So if you've been using iOS and you had been using the in-app browser feature, now that's the feature that lets you open up a or an in-app viewer feature. It allows you to open up for example, a web page in a separate window on your phone, and then you can come back to the Transform app when you're done. Because of a way that it was set up, it did not allow for pinch zoom, which is very annoying on a small screen. That's been corrected. We also noticed that when we were dealing with very large lists, that the choices were that it was becoming extremely slow when trying to make choices in a form, and we have speeded that up considerably by making some architectural changes there. Next, and it was an issue that you may or may not have noticed, was that it seemed to be uploading and downloading images an awful lot. And sometimes when when the device was offline, you couldn't see the images that had been downloaded. That has been fixed. Next up, and it's something that I had mentioned about a week or so ago, we did add support for HTML tables in your TPL forms. We've locked down a lot of what you can do with HTML in Transform because there's a lot of trouble you can get yourself into. But we decided that that tables are really quite useful. And I can actually show you an example in which I've used one in my own application. So we'll get to that in a moment. Some small thing for those of you using the APIs, if you had punctuation marks in your form types, it was causing some errors. That's also been corrected. It was a big problem though for a couple of our clients, so I want to let you know about that. And the last thing is we have a couple of new API methods, and a little bit later on I'm going to have Sarah just talk a little bit about some of the API methods that have been sort of quietly been introduced in the background to the API. You'll see that the list has grown significantly. But next up, I'm going to return to last week's discussion about the builder for the Transform OnSubmit events. So just a quick review as to what that was all about. So an OnSubmit action is an action that occurs after you submit a form, either using the Transform filler application or by creating a new form in the management console. Some of the things that you could do with an OnSubmit action is you could call a webhook if you wanted to trigger another process. You could send an email, you could send an SMS, and a few other things. And up until just a couple of weeks ago, the way you did that is by defining JSON, which would explain to the system what it is you want to do. In this example here, and I know it's a little bit small there on your screen, but I will read it out to you. We had two actions. One action was send email, and we indicated to whom it was being sent. It was being sent to these two people, Fred Smith and John Jones. We told you we specified what the subject should be for the email, the format for the email, HTML is the typical one, and which particular form IDs. We used a star to indicate that all forms need to go out, but we could have said that we're only interested in particular form types, and we could have specified those there. So that was send email, and the other one was post data. And post data was similar, except instead of providing URLs, instead of providing email addresses and subjects and send formats, instead you were providing a URL and headers as well that you wanted to send out with your request. Now, this is all very technical. So what we did was we ended up building a builder in our other product, Alpha Anywhere, which lets you build all of that JSON and test it out and get it right the first time by using Alpha Anywhere. In fact, when you're done, Alpha Anywhere can even submit your new OnSubmit policies back up to the TransForm cloud, like I have here in my slide. And last week we went over a couple of them. I think I did email, but the one that I wanted to show off was SQL Server, and it wasn't there. But I have a new pre-release build this week in which it is there, and that's what I'm going to show you. So let's get down to it. I'm going to open up Alpha Anywhere, and for those of you unfamiliar, Alpha Anywhere is like a companion product to Alpha Transform. It's Alpha Software's sort of original product, and it is a low-code system for building both web and mobile applications, and it is tightly integrated with Transform. So they are meant to work together, even though they can certainly work perfectly fine separately. So here we are in Alpha Anywhere, and I'm going to go up into the Tools menu, and I'm going to choose More. And I'm going to choose Transform Utilities, and then finally Builder for Transform OnSubmitEvent. Now, what I showed you I've showed this to you last week, and one of the first things you would do when you went into this Genie is you would want to retrieve this OnSubmit actions that are already in your account. So to do that, I'm just going to click this Fetch Definition from Transform Central. And you'll see it asks me for an API key, but it's remembered the one that I put in last time. So there it is. And I'm going to click Fetch Definition. And you'll see I've got two actions, Send Email, which is the one I worked with you last week in our last Transform Tuesday, and this new one called Send to SQL Database. This is the one that I want to talk to you about right now. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Send to SQL Database. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to go ahead and delete my action here, and we're going to start again so you can see how we do this from scratch. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to click Add Action, and I'm going to select which action. And we've been over again last week some of the other ones. This new one, Dispatch a Form, is actually really cool. I can't show it to you today, but I've seen it an alpha version of it, and it lets you dispatch, it lets you reassign the form that you're on to someone else, but it also lets you dispatch a new form to someone when you submit an existing form. So it's part of a workflow system. Anyway, enough of that. Back to Send to SQL Database. So that's what we're going to choose here, Send to SQL Database. And now that it's here in my list, I can go ahead and define its properties by clicking the Edit Action button right here. And there's Edit Action. And the first thing it asks me for is the name. So I need to tell it a specific form type. And in the account that I'm using now, let me go ahead and select it. I don't have a ton of them. I have this one, which was the appliance service form. Its short name is called Dish Form, and I've demonstrated that maybe months ago. But it collects a whole bunch of information. But one of the things it collects is a customer's name and their address, and so we're going to use that. Okay, so now that that's been selected, I now need to say, okay, when I get this information from Dish Form, I want to submit it to a SQL database, so I need to let the system know which database. I need to let it know its username and its password and how to log in and all of that. And we do that via a connection string. So I'm going to click here. And for those of you familiar with Alpha Anywhere and its connection string builder, you'll notice that this one is a little bit different. It's not really a proper connection string builder. Really what it's meant to do is allow you to import one that you've previously built. So this is called Import Properties from an Alpha Anywhere connection string. I'm going to choose that one. And I've already built two connection strings. In a moment, I'm going to show you how to build your own connection string, but I've set one up already for us. It's called Northwind Online GoDaddy, and it is the Northwind sample database that we tend to use in lots of stuff, hosted over at, you guessed it, over at GoDaddy. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to click OK. And here it's listed out all of my stuff. My password here is encrypted, so I don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to click Test Connection, and if I have everything entered in properly, I'm going to get a success message like I did right here. Now, what's really cool about this connection string builder and this test is that it's not actually testing it from my computer. Believe it or not, it's taken that connection string and it's set it up to the Transform server, and it's testing it from the Transform server. So here's the advantage to doing that. The first thing is that, for example, if you had set it up a local database and you had set the server, say, to localhost by accident, this would fail to indicate, hey, I can't get to that database. Even though it's on your computer and Alpha can see it, we need to make sure TransForm can see it. The second thing is that your database may have some sort of firewall rules that are necessary. In other words, you may have a database that is set up that only allows connections from certain IP addresses. I know we certainly do that here for our more sensitive databases, but for this one that I set up on GoDaddy, GoDaddy actually has no restrictions. On the other hand, if you do have a database that does require you to specify exactly which IP addresses it should accept, we've listed them here, so you can update the permissions in the firewall for your server for SQL Server if you'd like to. It will, and our requests will come from one of these 3 different IP addresses. Okay, that is set. I'm going to click OK, and we'll be back to the builder. And now we can specify what we would like to do. So I've put in the database connection string. I've selected the form. But now we need to say which field, which table I'm interested in my database. So I'm going to say refresh schema. What that does is that pulls the latest data there. So I'm going to choose table name. Oops, I have not specified a top, sorry. I think I've done something wrong here. Name for the table name for top. Oh, I think I'm running into a little bug here. Let me try that again. Okay. Oh, my bad. One more button to click here. I forgot it's only my 3rd time doing this. Sorry about that. Once I choose table name, I do need to choose a specific table. So I'm going to choose the customers table. That's the one which has got those the name and the address fields in it that I want to map to for my other form. So I'm going to click OK on that. I'm going to click OK there. And now my last step here is I'm just going to include a field value. Use cache schema. And I'm going to say that the customer name is equal to, and I can click this link here, insert table field. Into contact name. That is the field from my table, from my form. And let's say the city field, insert city, and I'm going to grab city, and there we go. And now I have it all defined at this point. So field with a primary key value, field in form data with primary key value. Oh yeah, I need to assign a primary key value to this. Let's give it let's give it this primary key. This is from the metadata. That'll be a good one. So I know that when I create a new record, it'll have a primary key. And field in top level table, the form instance ID. And here we're going to go with, oops. Actually, I don't know what that one is, but I haven't had to use it before. So let's just cancel out of that. I'm going to click OK. And now I have it set up and I can go ahead and test it. But before I test it, I need to push this up to the TransForm cloud. So all I do is I click OK at this point. And it shows me the definition that it's going to save to TransForm. I'm going to click Save Definition. It's warning me it's going to overwrite what was there. And now my definition has been saved to TransForm. So let me pop over to TransForm Central. And this is going to refresh. And you're going to see that over here in our OnSubmit action, it's created all of this JSON for us. It shows us that the form name, which is called dish form. It shows us that we're interested in a table that's called customers, that we're interested in the name, contact name and contact city needs to be mapped to field values. And a few other pieces of information go in as well. So now with this all in place, and I don't actually have to save this because Alpha did it anyway, I should be all set to start entering in records and having them appear in my back-end database. So that's what it takes to set that up. Are there any questions so far? Let me go ahead and look at the questions box. There we go. No yet. Although one person did point out I forgot to click the ellipse a moment ago to get into it. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Okay, so that is that. The one last thing that I want to do is if Sarah is there and she wants to talk a little bit about some of the new API features, we can do that. So let me go see if she is here.
I am here.
Sarah, oh, there you are. Wonderful.
Apologies.
Now, in fairness, I caught Sarah at the very last minute and said, "Hey, I need some help going over these things for a webinar today." So
Yeah, it doesn't help
thank you for
either
doing
that
this under very short notice. Can
also
I go ahead
I,
and make
I
you the
had my
presenter?
audio off for the
Oh,
first 10 minutes of the webinar here, so
oh, all right. Well, no problem.
I couldn't figure out why I couldn't hear you. Uh,
Okay.
I was
Can
on
I make
phone
you the
call mode.
presenter? I'm just-
Yeah, might as
Okay.
well.
All right.
So if you give me a second here, I'm gonna minimize a few things
Sure.
and hide that.
There are a
Okay.
lot more people here today than there were last week, which makes me think that you guys actually got the reminder from GoToWebinar. Did anyone get the reminder from GoToWebinar today? Because I think that system was broken until recently. If so, just type, yeah, I got the reminder.
If I got it too.
Oh, you did get it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I got two.
Oh, you got,
First
well,
time ever, so that's great.
that's
Thanks for
better than
fixing
zero. Yeah, great. So here we're looking at the TransForm API Explorer. Would you mind just
Yes,
backing up one moment just to show people how to get that? And this is
I
again
will.
in alpha anywhere.
So yeah,
And
there's actually two places you can find the API. I'm gonna show you Alpha Anywhere here first.
okay.
It's under the Tools menu on the Web Projects Control panel,
Mhm.
which if you're in Control panel, you can get there by clicking the Web Projects button on the toolbar. It'll bring
Right.
you here. Um, anyway, you go to Tools and you come down to Open Transform API Explorer, and this will list all of the Transform API methods available, including their scope codes that are required to use them. And I'm going to apologize now. The documentation on this online is actually missing those, and I'm working on getting that added back in. I don't know what happened. They went missing.
Okay.
But you need an API key that, at a minimum, allows the scope code shown, or all means all the API
Mhm.
access to all of the things. If you want to know what the scope codes are, you can actually come down here and find this. Let's see here. It is called GetAPI scope codes, and
That is
um,
so geeky to be able to call a function that documents the other functions. But,
right, yeah. So you can come down here and oop, I'll delete that later.
you can get
You got to put your API key in here first,
hmm
which you can get through Transform Central, and we'll walk through that here at the end when I'm done showing
Okay.
you this here. But once you've got that in there, you can test any of these things. Come down here, just press this test button, and it will list out all the scope codes that are available, and these map directly to the API creator back up in Transform Central. The only way that you really know what these three-letter codes are is if you actually come here and run this, unfortunately. But this is here.
We will update the
um,
documentation so you don't
yeah,
have to do that. But
I'm
that's
working
there.
on it.
If you want to get, I mean, and the point here
Yeah,
is that depending on what you're doing, you might want to choose an API key that's very restricted, and we'll talk about that
right.
in a
Yeah,
minute.
you certainly don't want to give somebody who only has read-only access to your form data an all scope API key, because with that
Mhm.
you can create API keys, delete API keys. You can also, this one I think is really, really cool. You can now get a list of all your API keys that you've created. And if you are me, you have created a million of these things and you don't know what they are because you didn't save them. But now you can come in here and you can get a list of everything that you've made. It tells you whether or not you've revoked it and the date it was revoked. I see here I made one with the scope CRA, which I think stands for create. It's been out there for a while now. I'm gonna lock that one down here after the end of this webinar for sure. Um,
Mhm.
but you can test here. You can get the curl call that you would send out to our endpoint, which is described. This is the endpoint here for get API keys. We show you how to do it in Node, and we also show you how to do it in XBasic. There's also an XBasic something else. Actually, this might be the XBasic thing I'm thinking about. Anyway, if you come in here on these three tabs, you can always click copy to clipboard, copy
Mhm.
this code, paste it where you need it in your XBasic or your Node service or wherever you want to put it, or curl. And then up here over on the right, on the first tab we have at the top here, we have, it says Explore, and then there's one called Help. It just gives you a brief description of what this method does. And as you go through these, this will update to describe all of that. So some cool new ones that were added. Get API keys is currently my favorite one because now I can go and delete all those API keys I created a very long time ago and then did not save. Because as some of you may know, you actually can't get a list of the API keys you created in Transform Central. We don't provide a way for you to do that directly. But some other stuff that we've got in here that's new, we've got SetOnSubmitEvent, GetOnSubmitEvent API calls now. So if you don't like if you don't want to use Alpha Anywhere's OnSubmit event builder, or if you want to get this stuff somewhere else, you can do that with the API. There's a new bulk update that I have requested a better description than login to Transform account because that's not what this does. What this actually does is it lets you do a number of updates. It lets you do a delete of a form instance, update a form instance, or create a new form instance, all in one call. So instead of doing multiple API calls, you can just do one, save yourself a lot of work in
And processing
learning
time,
logic
making
around
all
that,
those
and
calls.
processing too. Yeah, one
Yeah.
API call is definitely better than 20. So there's going to be more doc coming down the line on what this structure looks like soon
Now,
here.
there's one that isn't fully implemented, or it's
No, it's
fully
not.
implemented, but it's not set in, and we're talking about login. And what
Yeah.
login will let us do is, and this is very cool, if you're building a companion application, is if you supply it, so let's say you make a secure call to our server and you pass in the username and the password that your user has supplied, and TransForm will tell you whether or not those credentials are good for the account that they're looking at, which means that you can authenticate your application against what's in TransForm. That means one username and password for your end user, even though your application is separate from TransForm. So it's kind of a single sign-on type of situation, which I think we'll find really quite useful. Right now, it is locked down, so you're always going to get insufficient permissions. But I think in the next day or so, we will correct that, and that should be working. And what I'd like to show you would be an example of a login component in Alpha Anywhere that validates against Transform to make sure that the user is legitimate. So that'll be an example that I do really quite soon.
For sure, yeah. And
Yeah,
one thing I do want to point out while I'm in here, if I can find one,
sure.
every once in a while we'll put out a form, an API. I don't think I'm gonna hit on one very soon here. I wonder if I can use the arrow key. No, I can't. Every once in a while we'll release an API and it'll have some extra parameters that do double duty for internal use only, and it will say that it's for super user only. Super user is somebody who controls like Alpha Transform itself. So if you see a parameter that says this is for a super user only, you can't actually give yourself permissions to do that. That's for our use on the account on the API, because we use this ourselves when interacting with the app and through Transform Central. So I'd mention
Cool.
that. And so then the other thing I wanted to show you guys is the help online at
Oh yeah, great.
documentation.alphasoftware.com, transform documentation, which is the second place you can come in here into the reference to find the Transform API. And this is getting a revamp. We've got some of those newer methods up here, like the bulk API method. So you can actually come here and look. I apologize, I dropped the ball on getting the scope codes required, but where appropriate, we'll also look into expanding these examples. But here is where you can come and just sort of look over what we've got here. We also have instructions on how you get your Transform API key, which if you go to Transform Central, Developer Options Home, we call GetAPIKey, is the operation used to get one. These scopes are described here. They align pretty well with what Transform is asking for.
Right. Yep.
And there's that fabulous screenshot of the actual UI. And what we do is you would come in here and you would select what you want, and you would click Get API Key, and then a text box would appear, and you would want to select that API key and save it somewhere safe so you don't have to use get all API keys later to figure out what it was.
And it looks like if you wanted to have an API key that didn't fit one of these criteria, you could have one that fits multiple criteria. Like you could choose
Yes.
both read and
Yep.
edit, for example, but maybe not create a form or something like that.
Correct. Yeah.
And
Or
you do
delete.
that by holding down Control click as it shows.
Yep. You could Control click. It says it right here, right there at the very end. Use Control click to select multiple skips. And we do recommend that you use API keys with the least amount of privilege, just for maximum security. So. And then once you're done with your API key, you can use revoke API key, which is that next operation in the list to shut it off.
Which is what you'll be doing at the end of this webinar.
Oh, yes. Delete all my API keys.
So while you're there, do you want to give also a quick explanation of how to build a connection string in the first place? A lot of Alpha people know how to do this, but it is, if you haven't done it before, it's actually pretty easy. You just have to know how.
Just a SQL connection string?
Just a SQL to connection string, almost to any SQL source. Yep.
So SQL connection strings, they're actually called AlphaDAO, Alpha Data Access Object Connection String. It's a description of how to connect to your system of record, whether it be a database, access file, a JSON, some custom XBasic, whatever. If we don't connect to it directly, you can actually write your own connectors. Anyway, if you're in Alpha Anywhere, you're going to be on the Web Projects Control Panel. And my favorite thing to do is to click on the SQL button here and then select AlphaDAO connection strings. There are numerous ways to find this dialog. This one is my current favorite way to find it. And then once you're in here, if you are in here for the first time, and I'm just ignore the magic curtain here. Close that, come back in here. So the first time you come in here, if you don't have anything, you will probably see this create AA demo Northwind connection string. And all that does is creates a connection string that connects to the Northwind's database that we ship with Alpha Anywhere. It contains example data you can work with. That won't work with TransForm unless you publish it to a server so TransForm can talk to it. But that is available for you here. But to create a new one from scratch, you would come in here and you would click new. You would give it a name. The favorite one is con. I already have a con, so I'll make a con too. And then you click build, and then you select your API. If it's a SQL API, you can filter it down. Say let's go to access here. And then you'd fill out your credentials. You'd find the file, you enter your username and password.
And those vary from account to account. Like Access needs to know a file name, but in the case of SQL Server, for example, which is a common one, and maybe if you choose it, that would be cool.
If you pick the wrong one, just click the triple dot button up here. Go back in here and be like, oh, actually no, I meant SQL Server. It's going to show you.
Oh, it didn't update. Oh, there it is.
Give it a second.
Okay.
It's going to show you those things you need to connect. So, and we try to be helpful. Like if you're running SQL Server on your system, we try to. I think the thing we do is we take the machine name in SQL Express because that's usually like the default server that's running in some situations, and put it on here. If you're not sure how you need to format things, then we've got helpful links that explain it.
The one thing that tripped me up many years ago, I remember when I was setting these up, is I looked at server and I saw that it was a drop down, and I said, well, there's nothing that I want in the drop down, but in fact, you can type into that drop down box.
Yes, you can.
And in many cases, what you'll be typing in, is you might be typing in an IP address of your server. You might be typing in a domain name as to where to find your server. So that's sort of the typical thing to do. Great. Excellent.
Whatever you need to type in there.
Username, password, and you're good to go, and you can test
timeouts, SSH if you want a tunnel. If I'm using my local one, I just use my Windows authentication. And you always want to click this test connection button here at the bottom just to make sure you got everything right. And if you didn't, we're going to tell you that it's not right.
And why?
Sometimes it might be because you don't have the drivers installed to connect to it. So, But that's where you create this. And once you're done, you click OK. Click OK twice, so it actually saves it, and then your connection is ready to go.
Awesome. Great. Hey, thanks very much, Sarah. So we've run to the end of our time. Looks like we didn't have a ton of questions today, but I'm so happy everyone showed up. If you do have any questions about TransForm, feel free to send them to TF, as in TransForm, tfservice alphasoftware.com. That email is monitored by a team of people here, and we're happy to get back to you with an answer. So thanks again for attending, and we hope to see you next week. Take care and goodbye.